Good morning. I'm Ed James, and this is Black Almanac. With apologies to Nina Simone, let me say, to be young, gifted, and black, oh, what a lovely, precious dream. To be young, gifted, and black, open your heart to what I mean. In the whole world, you know, there are billions of boys and girls who are young, gifted, and black, and that's a fact. Today, I want to introduce you to two successful entrepreneurs, millennials, Beatrice Sims and Forrest Houston, both young, gifted, and black, and that's a fact. It's always good to see young folk and local young people. Now you, sir, moved here when you were a young man.
Yes.
And how old were you?
I was 12.
So you've been here long enough to be a Sarasotan.
Almost, yes.
And you were born in the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
And you all are doing many, many, many things. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourselves first, in any order?
Yeah, I'll let you go first.
All right. Well, my name's Forrest Houston. I own a company here in town called Contempo Web Studios. We primarily build websites, mobile applications, and web apps. I'm an entrepreneur at heart. My true passion really is just business as a whole. So really seeing how I can start more companies, help other people start companies, and be more mentorship's really a big thing as well. So being a local mentor in different events that are around as well. So really just overall have more of a passion for business. Moved here when I was 12, like you said, from Philadelphia. I went to Laurel McComas Middle School, and then I went to Venice High School. Graduated in 2014, and yeah, that's.
And you stayed?
Yeah, I stayed.
Now let's talk about you, Ms. Sims.
Yes. So my name is Beatrice Sims. I'm the owner of Spaghetti Ninja, as well as an entrepreneur like Forrest here. I graduated with animation, but along the way, I just picked up other skills because I have just a vast thirst for learning. So along the way, I picked up graphic design, mobile design, and I just love to apply it to different businesses wherever I can go.
Well, let's talk about the most important thing that you've done recently.
Yes.
And that's working on the Newtown Alive project.
One of my favorites.
Who designed the signs that you find at each one of the sites?
That will be me.
That would be you.
Yes, and it was one of my favorite projects to work on. It was a very, really interesting opportunity because I'd never done anything government-based and historically based, but I jumped at the opportunity because I just love history. I actually studied history, mostly towards on the arts like animation and especially towards American history, but I just like studying about history. So when I had the opportunity to learn more about Sarasota and Newtown's history, it was just really, really fun.
Mm-hmm. Now, where did you grow up?
I grew up in many different places. I was actually born and raised in Texas, but my family resides in Tampa. So when they heard that I was doing the Newtown project, they were just ecstatic. Because they were like, oh, you get a chance to really do something that's historical and for the community. That's fantastic.
All right. And you attended Ringling.
Yes.
So, you know, Ringling is buying up Newtown as fast as it can. Mm-hmm. But that's another story for another day.
Yep.
And what do you do with the Newtown Alive project?
So my company was responsible for designing and developing the application. So the mobile application, we took a lot of the elements from the beautiful site that Beatrice designed.
Thank you.
And were able to incorporate it into the mobile design. I'm not sure, have you gotten a chance to take a look at it?
I have.
Awesome. Did you like it?
I think it's wonderful, and I also sent you some of the corrections. and that, I could only do that. Why? Because I'm old.
And those corrections are really important. That's one of the things throughout all the time we spent working on the application. Those are some of the little things we got to go back and usually fix. But no, it was a really enriching experience. I learned a lot, really a ton about the culture and history here in Newtown and in Sarasota, which was really incredible, actually. Between the history from Sarasota and really how everything started, I saw why a lot of things were the way they were. It's very, very cool.
What do you, or what would you tell other young folk who say, what is an entrepreneur?
That's a good question.
You can go with this one first if you want.
Okay. I would say an entrepreneur, if I had to define it, not from the Webster's Dictionary, is just someone who's looking for different opportunities without being just like fixated on one job or one career. I like the ability to just explore different avenues. I get a chance to learn about the restaurant industry, the medical industry, the insurance industry. An entrepreneur gets to learn a bunch of different things, but also while making money doing it.
Oh, that's very important.
It's very important, such as a mortgage.
Tell me about Spaghetti Ninja.
Yes.
Where did that name come from?
It came honestly very random, but I also wanted a name that was stick in people's minds. I didn't want to go with like Sarasota web designer because you put that in Google, it's going to come up with different options here and there. But with Spaghetti Ninja, anytime I hand out my card, they do a double take like, wait, Spaghetti Ninja, and they always ask, what do I do? Because it doesn't answer it right away. If it was just Sarasota web designer and that was it, they would just guess it. Like, okay, that's what it is.
Just like somebody else, right?
Exactly. But if I always hand them a card, they're like, wait, Spaghetti Ninja, wait, what is this? Like, they always ask.
Makes you wonder.
Makes you wonder, makes people ask. But sadly, on the downside, I get a lot of mail that says, like, oh, you must be a restaurant, right? I'm like, no, I'm not a restaurant.
I thought the same thing. I met Beatrice before this project about a year ago, and her company was Spaghetti Ninja, and that was the first thing walking up to her office. I'm like, I wonder what she does. I'm like, I think it's animation, but I'm really not sure. So it was really cool first meeting with her a while back, actually, and then, yeah. But.
And the name of your company?
Is Contempo Web Studios. So I got the name Contempo from the word contemporary because I personally really enjoy, and my designers really enjoy, flat and minimalist design. So we try to focus a lot on more minimalist, flat design for websites and mobile applications, and web apps too. But primarily, really, it's from our design standpoint. It's kind of how our name came about.
Now, tell me that in layman's terms. Flat.
So flat and minimalist are a type of design. So it uses flat elements that, it's exactly how it sounds. There's not really a lot. When you're dealing with design, there's different, and correct me if I'm wrong here, because I'm not in design every day. So there's, with flat design, with other elements before flat design came around, there's different aspects of the way the icons show up, and it's usually more of a 3D element. So with flat design, it makes everything flat. So looking at it from a regular perspective, everything would look that way, but when you look at it from a sideways perspective, you notice everything's more 3D. With flat and minimalist elements, you'll notice that they're just much more flat. So, and I keep saying the word flat, but it's, the best way to determine flat is, how would you define it really?
I would define it more using solid colors and solid shapes versus using, for instance, using a gradient on your logo. I would say it's more like just absolute solid color, bare bones. That kind of style picked up as soon as we had more mobile devices. Back then, we had like really bulky, very kind of say it's three-dimensional. Yeah. But with mobile phones, because the screen is so small, the design started pushing towards more and more of what he calls minimalistic, which is bare bones, solid colors, solid shapes.
I'm interested in why did you all select the particular careers that you did. Now, you're a graduate of Ringling, and you could have done many things. Ringling has a relationship with this television station. Okay. How did you get into the particular division that you're in?
So it kind of started way back when I was in high school. In my high school, I had a great privilege. I went to Durant High School. I had a great privilege of learning all sorts of design and art elements. I learned traditional, I've learned web design, graphic design, like every single part of art you can think of. We even had pottery and ceramics, believe it or not. And so when Ringling approached my school, I had the choice, either go into animation or graphic design. I already had kind of like a mixture of both skills, but I chose animation because I thought I can learn graphic design a little bit later on, because I can't go back and learn. If I took a graphic design approach, there'd be no way I can learn animation. So upon graduation, I had the skill of animation and say, okay, what can I do with this? And thankfully, because I have such a thirst for learning, I just pick up graphic design. I'm more of like a see it and see, like I look at something and say, can I imitate this? And I just do it until I get to where I want to. And I kind of take that approach for everything. So I learned animation, picked up design, and in turn, I picked up motion graphics, which is sad because by junior year, they actually offered motion graphics as a major. So by the time I wanted it, it was too late. I was a year before graduation. But it didn't stop me from actually learning. So taking all those elements, I can just take my skill set and apply it anywhere I want to. There's no industry where I don't fit.
When we see markers, the community markers, what do we see from an artistic perspective?
I wanted to see your guys' scrapbook. That's pretty much what I wanted you guys to see. I want to see your guys' history, like kind of like you guys putting together a photo album. I know us millennials probably don't have those anymore. We have everything. We have our own scrapbook on our own phones. We have apps for that. But I remember my mom always had a photo album, and it just had all sorts of really, really cool, interesting things, from not just the photographs, but like just little trinkets, like the leaf she found at that park. So I want to incorporate that into the design.
And when I first saw them, and we had them on this program, I said, now that's an interesting color. Where did that color come from?
Warm colors tend to feel more nostalgic than cool colors. That's pretty much why I chose like all the oranges, browns, and also I had a pretty interesting start because Vicki Oldham, the director of the whole project, she handed me the logo for Newtown Live, and that was pretty much where I got my starting point. Like, I love the logo so much, and it had the brown, oranges, and yellows, and like the black and white that it had. So taking just like those 5 swatches of color, I was able to develop it much, much further.
I know that some grandmother or mother is going to see this program, and I'm going to get a call, and I'm going to give them your number.
Just not my address.
Yeah.
I think I'm knocking on my door.
Yeah, because they're going to want their children to talk to you, the both of you. And it's really interesting, and it's good to see from where I sit, a black project that's done by black folk. Too often, others try to interpret what we mean, what is good for us. And from top to bottom, from Vicki at the top, and her associate, whose name I don't remember right now, who worked with her, the lady, and then those who gave it life for us to see. The interviews was everybody's life, and yours were commissioned to make it live for us. So in this final minute we have, what you want to leave with us?
I'd say it's important to study history because I see way too much art and I see way too much design that can see something, but they don't understand why. They don't experience what made that design or that piece of work actually work. So that's my inspiration to most people, is take the time to really understand what you're doing in terms of design, in terms of what kind of project you're doing, because that makes all the difference between just putting something together versus understanding something and creating with a great product.
And you, sir?
There's 3 parts of business: what, how, and why. There's how you do things, there's what you do, and well, it's really what, how, and why. So there's what you do, how you do it, and then there's why you do it, which really piggybacks off of what Beatrice was just saying. So understanding why you're doing something will forever help you move forward. and that sounds really bland, but it's really the best way to put it. So as long as you're focusing on why you're doing something, you'll always really find the answers, even though it might not seem really, you know, what you might wanting to be looking for at that specific moment. So I would focus on just remembering why you're doing something and not how or what per se.
The why will be your strongest foundation.
Well, I'd like to thank you two for appearing on Black Almanac today.
Yes.
And to my viewers, I want you to understand, you can get the app, and it's free, from the App Store, Newtown Alive. Newtown Alive. And you can also go to the website. The website is newtownalive.com. .org.
.org.
Yep,
Newtown.
.org.
Thanks again, and stay with us. I'll be back with more. The midterm elections of 2014 saw the culmination of long-term trends in American politics and laid the groundwork for Republican successes in 2016. To what extent were the results the product of shifting partisan politics and demographic trends, and to what extent did policy questions drive the results? What can 2014 tell us about midterm elections generally? In this book, Races, Reform, and Policy Trends, scholars look at this election, its broad strokes, in case studies of key races in terms of policy questions. Joining me is political inquisitor Edward James III, who co-authored a chapter in the book. Mr. James.
Dr. James.
Good to see you.
Likewise.
So, you brought a book.
I did.
Tell me about that book.
Well,
and why did you bring it?
Well, I brought the book because I'm actually a co-author in this book entitled Races, Reform, and Policy, published by the University of Akron Publishing Press. Third chapter, I actually co-authored a piece called Florida's 2nd Congressional District, a blue dot in a field of red, that explores former Congresswoman Gwen Graham's election to the 2nd Congressional District in Florida, in North Florida.
Mm-hmm. You say, who are the authors in that book? Because you said there are several chapters.
Correct.
You have a chapter.
Correct. So every 2 years, St. Anselm College hosts scholars from around the country, particularly political scientists and other social scientists, to discuss the implications of elections around the country. And so in this particular book, they're exploring the implications of the 2014 midterm elections.
Mm-hmm. And how do they host this conference?
That is correct.
But how do does anybody just up and go?
Not just anyone. It's a group of scholars that work on several pieces, projects, and they actually submit those papers and present them at the New Hampshire Institute of Politics. So I had the great fortune of going to Manchester, New Hampshire with Dr. Robert E. Crew, who's actually the head of the political science department at Florida State University, and my colleague Alexandra Cockerham, who's actually now Dr. Alexandra Cockerham, who was also a student at Florida State University. And we presented this work in New Hampshire, and thankfully they thought that it was fit to be selected to be a published chapter in this book.
Mm-hmm. And so this is every 2 years?
Correct, every 2 years. So exploring both off-cycle elections as well as presidential elections. But this particular book focused on an off-cycle election. And what was so interesting, and the reason that we decided to explore this particular race, was because it was an anomaly. As many folks remember, 2014 was a wave year for Republicans. But in North Florida, Gwen Graham was one of only two Democrats to unseat incumbent Republicans. So Gwen
in the country.
In the country. So that's why we wanted to kind of delve in and explore what factors may have contributed to that.
Well, it sounds to me like you guys, when we start thinking of sociologists and political scientists, what I see is a lot of numbers and graphs and bars and what's the meat of what you all do?
So ultimately what we do is we look at certain variables and factors and try to deduce and come up with some kind of conclusion. What we found in this particular race was that a strong ground game was ultimately the reason that Gwen Graham was elected Congresswoman in 2014. Now, when I say ground game, I'm not talking about Leonard Fournette and the Jacksonville Jaguars running the ball down someone's throat. What I'm talking about is field organizers. So the idea of volunteers or even paid staffers who go door to door to actually articulate the message of the campaign. What we found was for every field office that was open in North Florida, Gwen Graham's vote share increased by 11.2%. And for every field organizer that was deployed on the ground, her vote share increased by 3%. Now, what was so interesting about this particular political terrain was that it was in North Florida. North Florida is interesting because Tallahassee sort of anchors that district. Now, this was a district that had 12 counties. So outside of Tallahassee, it was very rural. But Tallahassee, as you know, has Florida A&M University, the largest HBCU in the country, Florida State University, and certainly it's the seat of our government with lots of state workers. So it's been kind of a hub of Democrats. It also has Gadsden County, which is the largest, actually the only county in the state of Florida that's majority African American. So that was kind of a safe spot for Democrats. But outside of that, it got a little bit tougher. And the person that Gwen Graham was able to defeat was Steve Sutherland, who was a Republican.
When you get outside of that, start going west from Tallahassee.
Correct.
And a little southwest. That's really red country.
It's extremely red. So what we were able to deduce from our findings was that, you know, in the areas where she had to sort of run up the score, in Tallahassee and Gadsden County, she was able to run up the score. But she also had a sound defense, right, in places like Bay County, that's where Panama City is, and other western counties that had historically either gone Republican or has historically been the home of Dixiecrats. Dixiecrats are registered Democrats that essentially vote for Democrats at the top of the ticket, but the more local you get, you find that they actually vote for Republicans. So it was a district that was not your kind of textbook district, but you essentially needed a non-textbook strategy to win. And somehow we put it in a textbook.
Okay. I don't know. But I'm interested in some of the other chapters in the book. What did they explore, and what did they do?
So they explored other races around the country, so other congressional races, other gubernatorial races around the country.
Why would someone buy this book who was not so political or an interesting press person to see?
Right.
Who would buy that book?
I think anybody who works with campaigns, and oftentimes when we say campaigns, people think politics, 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 but there are social media campaigns, there are nonprofit campaigns, especially in a town like Sarasota, a nonprofit hub, people have giving campaigns. And this book, particularly the chapter that we focused on, really explores the nuts and bolts of what a successful campaign looks like, the outreach, the advocacy aspect of it.
Outreach and advocacy. Explain advocacy for me in the terms that you're speaking of.
Advocacy is articulating your position on a particular issue and making sure that you amplify that to the masses. So again, when we talked about the ground game and how robust the ground game was for former Congresswoman Graham, it was essentially everyday people or people of that community going out into their respective communities, their churches, their synagogues, their civic organizations, and advocating for this particular person, Gwen Graham. It was a door-to-door effort. Obviously, big-time commercials and debates are great, but we find that elections are won by people kind of strapping up their boots, rolling up their sleeves, and taking it to the streets.
And talk a little bit, if you would, about Gadsden County, because you say that's the only county in the state of Florida.
Correct. So there are 67 counties in the state of Florida, from Bay County all the way down to Monroe County with Key West. And Gadsden County is the only county of those 67 where the majority of residents are African American. So historically, African Americans have been loyal participants, if you will, of the Democratic Party. So it was important for Gwen Graham to win, to run up her score in Gadsden County.
So if she had just taken Gadsden County for granted and not try to run up the score,
right,
just say, I'm going to get the
she would not have been the Congresswoman. She would have won Gadsden County and probably Leon County without a ground game. But again, she had to sort of cut her losses in the western region of that particular congressional district, which was extremely red.
What percentage of the vote did you get in Gadsden County?
I believe that it was somewhere north of 80%.
North of 80%. Well, for those who don't know, and everybody's always trying to figure out what folk do.
Right.
Scholar, since you are running with that crowd.
Well, thanks for bestowing that title upon me.
Yeah, tell me, what's your educational background? You got about 40 seconds before we're out of here.
Sure. University of Chicago graduate in political science, master's in applied American politics and public policy from Florida State. And even though I have a really short period of time, I want to take focus off of me and talk about a dear friend of mine, Dr. Devon Wade, who unfortunately passed away due to gun violence this past week. Was a good friend of mine. We worked on projects together. Devon was doing his dissertation at Columbia University on children with incarcerated parents. He used the final seconds of this program to lift up a bright young African-American scholar who died, unfortunately, at the age of 28 at the hands of gun violence. In gun violence, and let's remember, Dr. Devon Wade, sociologist, Columbia University, and my dear friend, who I will truly miss.
Well, thanks.
Thank you.
And to our viewing audience, thanks again for watching. And as always, have a great day, Suncoast.
Credit card debt can ruin your life. If you owe $10,000 and minimum payments are siphoning away your paycheck each month, you can get debt-free in less time than you think.
I've paid $800 a month for the past 3 years and haven't changed the balance on my credit card.
Get debt-free now has a program to reduce your debt, stop the harassing phone calls, avoid financial ruin, and settle for less than you owe.
I feel like a huge weight has been lifted off my shoulders.
You're pre-approved for our special hardship program if you owe $10,000 or more. Upon payment of your new lower balance, your debt will finally shrink until you are debt-free.
My family no longer has 30 years of payments ahead of us at 20% interest.
There's no fees until you see results. So call now, make one monthly program payment, and free up your cash. Resolve your debt.
Call 800-685-6422, 800-685-6422.
ABC 7 News at 7, weeknights.